Meteorologist Brett Anderson here in the 1011 Weather Center. We're going to be doing our weather workshop coming up in just a minute or so. We're just getting some things ironing out. We're going to do something a little different today. We are using an iPad right now because we're going to be moving around a little bit today, so we're not going to stay on the actual computer. So it might be a little bit jumpy from time to time. I apologize for that. There's Brandon.
Hello.
Brandon Reck will be helping us out today. So
6 feet away.
that's right. So I'm going to be handing him now the camera. Or am I throwing it to you like a Frisbee? Maybe not. Maybe not. Okay. We'll figure it out. All right. It is 1 o'clock now. So there we go.
Okay.
All right.
All right.
Okay. So I need to find the weather clicker, which is right here. I'm Brett Anderson. Welcome to another weather workshop. We've been talking about a lot of topics over the last few weeks, and last week we talked about how to put a weather forecast together. Ken talked about rainbows earlier this week, and now we're going to talk about some of the weather instruments. Some of them are fairly, you you probably already know, thermometers and rain gauges and things like that, but we're going to talk about a few other things as well. So first we're just going to take a look at some graphics. We'll just kind of run a few things before we take our little trip. This is basically a weather station. This is kind of a professional one. This is from the National Weather Service. It's called an ASOS station. A lot of these are usually at airports across the country. Not all of them, but a lot of them are usually at airports. But this is where a lot of data is collected. The wind speed, the temperature, the humidity, the barometric pressure, all recorded and sent again, to the big supercomputers that we talked about earlier and to other data as well. So that's kind of the big weather station that you might see at the airports, places like that. Now, what a lot of weather observers do is, because there's a lot of places, there are thousands of what we call weather observers, and they have maybe a weather shelter system or a weather station in their backyard, and they actually will record highs and lows, precipitation, humidity, and then send that information to the National Weather Service every day. And this is kind of like what some of the weather stations look like. They've been looking like this for a long time now, over many decades. Some of them are starting to change, a little more modern, but there you can see the outside of it, and then inside is protected. And there's, we'll talk some about some of this equipment here, but there's a thermometer, there is a humidity detector as well. So basically that's what we have. Now, that's me, Brandon.
Wow, that
Yeah.
is a very young Brad Anderson.
That is a very young Brett Anderson. I was one of those weather observers. When I was in college, the college was responsible for recording the data of the town I lived in and sending it to the National Weather Service. So while I was in college, twice a day I took weather observations, so it was like that. And again, that's what is a barometric pressure, a thermograph actually is what that is, this box right there. A little bit more on that, it actually records the temperature line, and there was the high and low temperatures as well as a psychometer, which we'll talk about in a little bit. So weather observers, we've had thousands of weather observers over the decades. There have been people, even in Nebraska, that have been recording weather in the back of their yard or their farm for 40, 50 years. So weather observers are still very, very important in collecting data, climate data, basically all year round. So here are some of the other tools that we've talked about. This is kind of a standard rain gauge. We'll talk more about that. This is more of a professional rain gauge, National Weather Service, and there's actually a tube in there, and that's where the rain collects, and then they actually measure it with what looks like a little ruler or a yardstick. That is something that I did as a weather observer as well. That's how I measured the rainfall back in the day, back in the old days. We talked about weather balloons collecting data. This is what a radio sound looks like. And basically the balloon is carrying that up, and it's recording all the information, the temperature, the humidity, the pressure as it continues to rise into the atmosphere to get data on all levels of the atmosphere. So there's a weather balloon about ready to be launched with the radio sound at the end. Just a few other tools. Barometers, this is an aneroid barometer. Some people may have this in your house. It's like a nice decoration, but it also gives you the pressure. A little fancier and maybe a little more vintage is what's called a barograph, and this basically records the barometric pressure, and it keeps a record of it. Now again, this is a little outdated. A lot of times we don't use that. We just basically keep track of it through the computer system, and again, data being sent from the pressure stations. So again, basically that is, again, vintage. That's something that I looked at a lot, but it's kind of a cool looking tool. So again, we're not gonna go to the questions yet because we have a lot more to talk about. So first, we'll come over here and again, talk about some of the tools that we use here. And again, I was talking about the rain gauge. I showed a picture of that. This is actually my rain gauge that I use in the backyard. It's somewhat of an official one for private weather observers because it basically records the moisture. This tube here records the rain and the snow, so the rain fills up. So this whole tube right here, if it were to fill up, is 1 inch of rain. So now what happens is if we have more than 1 inch of rain, it overflows and goes into this bigger tube. So then we measure 1 inch, and then if there's more, we put the funnel on, and we just keep on pouring it, and we just keep on adding all the inches up. So that's how we record rain, and this can actually hold 11 inches. So if we were to have some kind of a major big storm, we could hold 11 inches of rainfall, so that's certainly unheard of. Now, in the wintertime, or when we're talking about snow events, we take both of these features off, and then we just leave it like that. And then the snow collects in there, and then later on, we can, after the snow is over with, we can take it in the house, melt it, and then measure the liquid content, just like we did the liquid content of the precipitation, just like we did with the rainfall. Just pour it in there, and that's how we find that out. So that's a little fancier rain gauge that we use. And there are so many, you can go to the hardware store or any place you can find rain gauges all over the place. So we're going to talk about some other things that we use. Again, first, we start with this one over here. I don't want to jump ahead. We'll talk about the weather balloon here in just a little bit. Okay, so basically, here's another example of a rain gauge. This is something that a lot of people may have in their backyard. Maybe your parents have it in the backyard, or your grandpa has something very similar to this. Just kind of a simple rain gauge to let people know what kind of, or how much moisture we have. This is an official snowfall measuring device. So, I mean, it does look like a ruler. It is a ruler. So basically, you go out and you measure the snow. So that's an official, right, Brandon?
Right, but how do you officially measure snow?
Well, what you have to do is you have to, especially if it's windy, you have to measure in 3 different spots. And then you kind of get an average of what it is. Especially, it's very difficult. There's not really any kind of scientific way to measure snow, especially when it's really windy. So that's why you need to take it in 3 different spots to kind of get an average of what the snowfall is. So if it's a nice, steady, light snow or snow that doesn't blow around, that's my favorite because then it's just so easy. It's usually the same all the way around, right, Brandon?
Right.
But in Nebraska, we rarely have snow events that don't have some kind of wind. So it can be challenging sometimes, especially in those open areas. Now this, and we'll talk more about this, this is actually an anemometer. And basically, this is recording the wind speed. The wind will blow, and it'll record, tell us how fast the wind is blowing. Gives us it in miles per hour. So that's very important. So that's something we're going to take a look at. All right. And sometimes people out in the field, maybe storm chasers or just anybody, sometimes we'll have this electronic one that you could just take outside and just put it up there and you can kind of get the wind real fast. So that's kind of more of just a personal one that you can carry along. All right, so we'll put that over there for now. And now we're going to talk a little bit about the weather balloon. We do have an example here. I'm not going to be able to blow up the weather balloon like they do at the National Weather Service and launch it. I don't have a large supply of helium.
Yeah.
So this is actually the radio sonde right here. This is the weather equipment. There's sensitive weather equipment in there. And again, then the balloon launches. The balloon is in here. Again, it's just kind of a fabric. And you can kind of see it there. Kind of a rubbery feeling to it. So of course it expands with helium. And then of course it launches into the atmosphere. Now this little orange thing is actually kind of like a parachute, because once the balloon goes up high enough, it actually eventually will pop, because the pressure will be so great inside the balloon that it will actually expand and pop. So therefore, because this equipment, if it lands safely, can be used again. So it basically, there's a bit of a parachute, it lands softly. So if you ever find one of these, there's actually instructions on where to send it to, where to send it back to the National Weather Service, and they might be able to use this again. Now, a lot of them are probably lost and never found again, but the thing is, if you do ever find one of these in your field or your yard, then you'll want to send the equipment back, and there are instructions on how to do that. So that's just kind of the weather balloon, the radiosonde. Again, there's a thermometer in there. There's pressure, measures the pressure as it goes up into the atmosphere. All right.
And why are those important to us, Brad, to get these weather balloon measurements?
Because there's things going on at different levels of the atmosphere, not just here at the bottom of where we are on the surface, where we know the wind and the temperature, but we need to know what's going on above us. As we get up to 100 feet, to 1,000 feet, 10,000 feet, we need to know all the weather conditions, the temperature, the wind, and the pressure and the moisture content. So that is why we need to know what's going on up above us, as well as what's happening here on the surface. So that's why weather balloons are very important. Of course, we talked a little bit about it, the temperature, the thermometer. A lot of people may have thermometers like this in their backyard, just to kind of measure it. We have, if you'll follow me, Brandon, over here, we have our little weather system right here. And I'm gonna go over on this side, and then you can just kind of maybe zoom in. So we get a lot of our data from this thing. We have a thing on the roof, a weather station, and we get all kinds of information. So sometimes if you watch our weathercasts, you will hear us say, hey, the temperature at the station's 45, temperature at the airport's 47. So we can kind of get a reading of what's happening in this part of town compared to what's happening in at the airport. Was this your cookie?
No.
Okay, good, because I was gonna eat it later. So, all right. So again, that's just another example of a weather station. One other thing I wanted to show you, and again, some of this stuff is not used on a daily basis. What this is here is actually a sling psychrometer. This is how you can actually tell what the humidity is outside. Now, this may be important for farmers. It may be important for rangers to know what the humidity is in case there's a fire season or it's very dry. So what you have here is just a standard thermometer right there, and then you have another thermometer over on this side, but there's a little wick there, a little kind of cottony fabric. So we put that on there, and then we actually will get this wick wet. We actually get it wet. And then what we do, I don't know, this might fly off, but what we're supposed to do, you see Brandon backed up there.
I'm backing up.
I would too. So what you do here is you start going like this, you do this for several minutes. So what happens is after we're done, is we'll take the air temperature, what the actual air temperature is, what that's called the dry bulb, but because when water evaporates, it's a cooling process. So because the water is evaporating from this wick here, the temperature on this side is actually low. So then you take the difference, the dry bulb minus the wet bulb temperature, and then you look at a chart, a humidity chart, and you can actually find out what the relative humidity is. Or if you have one of these fancy little slide rules, you can also figure out what the humidity is. So this is something that some people might use in the field, like if they're out in the forest and they need to find out how dry the air is or how moist it is, they can use one of these little kits. But these tools have been used a long time before computers and more of the electronic devices that record the humidity. People use these sling psychrometers quite a bit. So that was pretty cool. You were a little scared then, weren't you?
I was.
Yeah, I didn't know if it was gonna fly out. Okay, so now we're gonna go on to the field trip. Are you ready for this? Brandon has no idea what we're doing.
Nope.
So he's just gonna follow us here. And
Okay.
we're hoping that the internet connection is good. I did a test run earlier and it did seem to be working fine. So we're gonna take a little tour, see a little bit of the station behind the scenes. All right. It's the newsroom. That's Andy. So this is the hallway. That's where I get water. This is our little sitting area for when we have guests. So we're gonna go upstairs now. Still with me?
Yep.
All right, still good? Okay, so now we're in this room. Here's a little history, not so much weather, but if you look out there, we have a bird's eye view of the studio. Now, a long time ago, even before I worked here, there used to be live television shows, children programs. And so the children would come in and they would be down in the studio during the live show. And then this area is where the parents sat. Now that hasn't happened for a long, long time. So now we just kind of use this as storage. But again, a long time ago, this is actually where the parents sat. All right. Be careful, Brandon. Those are some pretty big steps there. We're gonna head outside. It's gonna be bright. Make sure the door doesn't shut because we'll be locked out here. So we're on the roof now. We're on the roof here at 1011. And basically I just kind of brought you out here to show you where our weather equipment is right here. Is the sun bothering that? Should you go on the other side, or is it a pretty good view?
I think we're okay.
Pretty good view. So again, you can see the anemometer. You can see the wind vane, which kind of tells us where the direction is. There's actually two up there because we have an older system that we don't use anymore, but we still have that one that I showed you downstairs, the computer panel, the computerized one, that black one, and the little one, that is the current wind speed and gives us the wind direction. So it looks like it's a little bit out of the south. And then you see a couple of different rain gauges. One of them is obsolete, that's the gold one, and then the black one is the one that we actually use now, and that's actually where the thermometers. You can see where those white things on the bottom of the rain gauge, that is actually what's called a weather shield, and that's where the actual temperature probe is. So it gives us an accurate temperature of what the high and the low will be and what the current temperature is. So that's where we get the rain data, the wind data here at the station, as well as the high and low, as well as the humidity. We find out the humidity as well as the dew point. So that's our little weather station here. And it does a pretty good job, I think, for the most part.
Yep.
All right, so that's that. And I'm going to show you one other thing. We're going to have to do a little more walking. I'm going to let you go first, Brandon, so you can see, and then I'll shut this. I want to show you, folks, one of our tools that you might have heard of. You know where I'm going with this, don't you, Brandon?
I believe so.
All right. So again, and if there's any questions, do you see any questions on there while we're walking, Brandon?
There was one question earlier about can they watch these back later. Yes, you can find them either on the Facebook Live page, I believe they're there, or you can go to the weather page, the 1011now.com/weather, and you should find a link to all of our previous weather workshops.
That's on our website, right?
Yes, on the website.
Awesome. Okay. So just one more thing to show, and again, this is something that we use for to show people news, maybe weather conditions of what's going on. Some of you may have seen this or heard this before. I'll let you go first.
Okay.
All right. This is just kind of the back area. This is kind of the garage. Again, a lot of storage, kind of ladders, tools, things like that. Okay. We're almost there. And behold, as I open the door, there it is.
Yep, it's the weather shield.
The weather shield. Exactly. So again, this is something that we use as a tool during perhaps stormy weather. We can drive around. You can just go in there and look in there, Brandon. We drive around. We can get some weather information. We tell the viewers what the roads are like, what the conditions are like. If there's been hail or rain, or we use this even in the snow. And then, of course, we have a satellite dish in case we can't use the Wi-Fi or cell phone. If that somehow is not good wherever we are, we can actually use a satellite dish to actually get information to viewers about any situation. We also have on this system, we don't have it on right now, but we will, another little mini weather station. So it gives us current conditions wherever we are. So we could, be driving, and this will tell us the wind, the temperature, the humidity, and the wind direction. And so that uses the solar power there. So that helps us a lot as well. So that's just some of the things I wanted to show you. Again, we have a computer, we have radar with our 1011 Now weather shield. And again, basically, it really can help us out. It lets people know what's going to happen when there's storms. Again, some of you may have seen this before. Let's see, there's cameras all over the place. I'll open this one here. Usually we have a driver, and then we have someone sit back here, someone can sit up front as well, and then we can show different cameras and get different information. I know it's kind of dark in there right now, but basically we've been using that to track weather. We sometimes take it out to schools when school's in session for kids to take a look at. So we like this. We've used it for the snowstorm. You've driven it a few times, haven't you, Brandon?
Yes, but if we are out in severe weather conditions or talking about snow on the roads, there is always someone else driving so we can focus on the weather, telling you what's going on, and also control the cameras and whatever we need to do. So we are not doing both at the same time. We get that
Yes.
question from time to time.
Yeah, exactly. So, right, someone is driving constantly, and then we are doing the weather information, changing the camera views, and collecting the weather data. So that's basically it. That's just some of the tools that we use to collect data, not only for the National Weather Service, but for ourselves here at the studio, how we keep track of temperature and moisture and precipitation, that kind of stuff. So very important to all these weather instruments, and of course they have changed over the year. Of course, computers are a big thing now. Of course, years ago they didn't have computers, so they had to do these things differently. And now, of course, we have the computers that help us out quite a bit. So now we are back. Do you see any questions there? Do we have to open something else up to see more questions? We do have some time now for some of those questions.
Someone just asked who usually drives it. That was Karen asking that. And, well, it just kind of depends on who's available to help us out. It's usually one of the reporters, or sometimes two of us may go out. Brad and I may go out, and maybe I'm driving and Brad's the one doing the report, or vice versa. Just kind of depends on the situation.
That's right. I remember I was driving, we were in covering a snow event, and our news director was actually driving one time, and I was the one that was talking about road conditions and the snow conditions and the forecast while we were driving. So Brandon is right. It kind of depends on who's available. Sometimes it might be a reporter, or it might be another meteorologist. So that's how that goes. And fortunately, we haven't really had to use it that much because it really hasn't been that stormy yet. I think we did take it out when we had the April snow event a couple of weeks ago. I think that it was driven around.
Yes.
We had that snow, but we didn't really have a lot of snow this past winter in Lincoln. It was only 17 inches, so we really didn't have any big events to cover. And of course, we never want severe weather, so far it's been relatively quiet. So we haven't been driving around. And as I mentioned, a lot of times we even take it to schools for the kids to see, but of course, because school is not in session right now, we haven't been able to do that. But of course, someday we're all going to be back to school and we'll be able to do that, and maybe you'll take it out to your school someday. So maybe it'll be in the future.
Amy wants to know, have we ever had to take shelter during a broadcast?
Good question. We get that question a lot. I personally never have, and as far as I know, at least since I've been here, I don't think Ken has. I don't think you have either, Brandon.
No.
But we do have a situation, we do have a setup. If the station is in immediate threat of severe weather, a tornado, for example, we do have a pretty decent basement here, and we are able to continue to broadcast live with our microphones, and the station have information up, the radar information up, while we go down to the basement. We can continue to talk, we can still continue to show you where the storm is and what's happening while we're in the basement. Now, of course, if the station were to take a direct hit by a tornado, then of course we would probably end up going off the air, and that would be any of that. But yes, we do have a safe place to be if we need to go, and we can continue to broadcast as long as everything is still working. But in my experience in the 25 years, I haven't had to do that as far as I know. Brandon hasn't had to do it, and Ken has not had to do it, again, in the 25 years that I've been here. And that's good. We don't want to do that.
Right. Farthest we've taken the weather shield.
Go ahead.
Oh,
Brandon.
no, I think at least into south central Nebraska. I think,
Right.
I want to say at least maybe when we first had it, we took it maybe as far west as the Tri-Cities area and maybe points further south.
We have taken it to events, I think, in Grand Island and Hastings. Now, as far as actually tracking weather, I'm not sure. I think I've only been around the Lincoln area as far as when we've been doing weather information, so I don't know how far people have gone out yet as far as covering other kinds of severe weather. But for special events, I know we have taken to Grand Island, Hastings, Superior, places like that.
Right. And we have also taken it, I believe, a couple of times during severe weather. John Walsh took it out, I believe, towards the Tri-Cities one time, then went down towards Beatrice and kind of portions of southeastern Nebraska at one point. But we kind of go where we need to, depending on the weather situation, and we'll just see how things play out. Of course, severe weather season just now starting to crank up for us.
That's right. Yeah, we're not even close to the peak yet here in Nebraska. So we may need to be using that again. We don't like severe weather. We certainly hope it doesn't happen. We'd much rather take the weather shield out to the schools, like I talked to events to show people that. But we just need to have the weather shield in case we do have kind of severe weather, just to let the viewers know at home what's going on without you guys having to get out there, or maybe prevent people from going out because of a bad snowstorm or severe weather damage.
And Aaron wants to know when the National Weather Service started recording weather data.
That's a good question. Believe it or not, our forefathers, some of them were recording weather data. Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson kept weather journals. So people have been trying to keep some kind of weather journal for a long, long time. And to at least here in Lincoln, I believe our records go back to, I want to say, is it 1879, Brandon, 1880? Or is it a little bit earlier than that?
Might be earlier than that.
Might be a little bit earlier than that when we started our temperature record. I know it was, again, between about 1870 and 1880 is when Lincoln started to record, and has a pretty decent temperature record since then. So it depends on what part of the country you live in. Obviously, in the eastern part of the United States, since they have been around longer, their weather data probably goes back even longer. But I do know the stories of that Thomas Jefferson, as well as some of the other forefathers. George Washington, I believe, also kept a weather journal, weather diary, and so did Benjamin Franklin.
Deborah was wanting to know, how about the radar equipment when you talk about the different weather models like the European model?
So you're talking about the different weather models? Do you think that's what she's asking?
I think so, or maybe how the precipitation is maybe put into those models, perhaps.
Okay, we kind of talked about this last week when we were talking about the weather models. Again, the weather models are computer models that get different information at different times and different speeds, and so therefore the equations may be a little bit different on each one. So that's why sometimes one model may say there's a lot of precipitation coming where another model says there's not. So that's what we have to do, is we have to kind of look at all those different models and try to figure out exactly which one is more accurate. We talk about sometimes this model has 15 inches of snow, but all the other models might only have 2 or 3. We call that an outlier model, meaning that we don't think that's going to happen, and 95% of the time it doesn't happen, those outlier models. But eventually, not all the time, but eventually sometimes these models, as we actually get closer to the event, do start to tend to agree with each other a little bit more, if you will. Maybe not perfectly, but they do give us a better picture. So that's why a lot of times when we're talking about a snow event or some kind of event 3 or 4 days out, we'll show you model information, and they're all over the place. But as we get closer, we get a better idea of what kind of event we may be seeing around here. I hope that answered your question.
Aiden from Soresco says my favorite book is Weather for Dummies. What's yours?
Well, that's amazing, because that's exactly where I learned everything about weather. I have so many weather books that I've read over the years. I know there's one called, when I was first in college, called Meteorology Today, and that had basically, it was almost a textbook, because it basically kind of told us everything about how things formed, about cold fronts, barometric pressure, tornadoes, hurricanes, and it was just so well written that I really enjoyed it and really learned a lot from that. I still have that book somewhere at home. So that's probably my favorite, but I've got books on tornadoes, and hurricanes, so I've got a lot of them.
Let's see. Comment here. Simon says his dad is a ham radio operator. Do you utilize them for help if your systems go down?
Well, we use their help all the time. When there's a tornado event or like a tornado watch, like we'll just talk about Lancaster County here, we actually have storm spotters go out to certain parts of the city, certain parts of the county, and watch the skies, watch to see if there's any kind of tornado. That's another tool that I could mention that I didn't mention in the presentation, but that is another tool. We need these weather observers, these weather watchers, these storm spotters, to help us determine where these storms are. Sometimes people can see a funnel or a wall cloud maybe before the radar starts to pick it up. So we get that information. That information is sent back to the county, and we get the information here at the 1011 studios as well of what's going on. So storm spotter is very important, and I know that some of them do use ham radios. And especially, and of course, if we did lose all kind of communication, if unfortunately a tornado hits a small town and destroys the infrastructure, ham radios become very important to communicate to the outside world to bring help. So ham radios are still very important in today's society, especially if there's some kind of a disaster.
I think that's all the questions we have.
All right, and perfect timing, 1:30. Thank you for joining us. So just kind of showing you the tools that we use in meteorology. Some people might call them toys. This little sling psychrometer, that was fun. I haven't done that in a long time.
Well, we have a last minute question here.
Okay,
I think could
all
be
right.
good. If you could invent a new weather instrument, this is from Sandy, what would it be and what would it measure and what would you name it?
If I could invent it, I would invent a machine that would tell me exactly what the forecast would be, and it would be 100% accurate every time. That would be the perfect system, the perfect weather tool.
Yep.
It's probably not going to happen for a while. Well, at least I know I won't invent it, but maybe somebody will in the future.
Yes. And one last question. How do you become a storm spotter?
Well, you have to be old enough. I don't know. I think you have to be 18 to be a storm spotter.
I
I'm not
think
sure
so.
the
I think, yeah,
age.
there is a certain age
Right.
requirement.
But you have to go to a training session. They usually have those once a year. You have to go to a training session, know what to look for, know what clouds to look at, what's a wall cloud, what's just what we call scud clouds, which are not severe weather clouds. So there's a little bit of a training period of what to look for, and then you become certified, and then you become a storm spotter.
Yeah, best way to find out might be to call your county's emergency manager, and they can help you become a storm spotter.
Exactly. That's right. You bet. Again, I'm not sure on the age. You obviously have to be able to drive, but my guess is it might be at least 18. So, but again, like Brandon said, you might want to check with your county's emergency management.
All right. I think we're good.
All right. Thanks again. Thanks to Alla for helping out. Thank you, Brandon, for being the camera person today. I appreciate that. I had a lot of fun doing this. So again, do you remember what Ken is talking about? I had it in the back of my mind, and now I forgot.
I
think
believe he's going to talk about something that a lot of people have talked to us through the years about. What is the difference between dew point and humidity?
Oh, yes, that's right. But what is the difference between dew point and humidity? We talked a little bit how this can measure the humidity, but he will go into more details on dew point and humidity. So that'll be very interesting. So that'll be Tuesday at 1 o'clock. All right. Goodbye for now. Thank you very much, and we'll talk to you later.